Welcome to another episode of The State of Sustainability. I'm your host, Saif Hameed. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into the bowels of sustainable brand building. And I'm super excited to have the founder and CEO of what I consider to be a super sustainable brand, Buffy, in the bedding space. Leo and I have been close friends for a long time. And so this was the sort of casual chat that Leo and I would probably actually have just together off an evening. So Leo, let's jump right into it, right? I guess I want to kick off with this question of, you obviously put a lot of thought into starting your business. And I think that in many ways, the sort of bedding sector and space came a little naturally to you, given, the work that you've done previously and, family background and so on as well. But I know that you put a lot of careful thought into the brand that you were building. And the brand that you were building was one with great intention. And knowing a little about how you think, I know you saw the brand also a bit as an extension of you and your values and one of the ways that you would leave your mark on the world. It looks to me that sustainability was a big part of that brand from the get-go. Am I right? And feel free to say no, actually, Saif, with respect, you're off on that.
No, I think you're right. I started this brand about 8 years ago as a young man, and I think as a young man, you really do want to make a statement. And I think at the time, this was around 2017, 2018, it was really in the heyday of D2C brand building, when meta costs were cheap, Google didn't cost as much either. You could really tell a strong story all of a sudden, because you weren't just restricted to the old brand building methods before that. And we were very excited about sustainability. We thought that there was this really strong rising wave of interest and understanding and education, and wanted to harness that for sure.
I actually noticed, Leo, that you're harnessing it maybe a little less actively in recent years. And what I really liked when you and I did our little sort of prep call for this is I loved how you sort of took me to the website and you sort of showed me the different blocks. And you kind of said, actually, this is responding to consumer needs.
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
Yeah, given we don't do a lot of video feed on this podcast, like most people listen to it on audio, could you also just talk us through what you're going to show us? Because I thought that was really fascinating, and that's direct consumer insight, basically, right?
Absolutely. So this is the homepage of the brand's website. As you can see, there isn't all that much about sustainability today, particularly right when you land. And I think that is really reflective over time of, as we have iterated and edited the website, what messages, what kind of content really needed to rise to the top was really salient to people visiting, that people actually cared about. It's not really until probably 3/4 of the way down that we touch on sustainability, and not even super directly, where we talk more about the other side of the sustainability coin, which is really around safety in our case. And I don't think there's a direct sustainability message until really all the way at the bottom here, right above our footer, around all of the upcycled plastic that we've used over the years, right? I think when we started the business, we had in mind this vision that the mass consumer was ready for sustainability, that Gen Z was maturing, getting into their first home, and ready to buy bedding that was informed by their value premises. We started the business by basically distributing our product in every single Bed Bath & Beyond store in the country, 1,000 doors. And that product packaging, the end caps, all of the design really messaged sustainability. And I think that was the first time we really realized that, no, not everyone is ready for this, especially for that to be the first message. And in those first few months, we went through several different packaging designs in order to focus more on things like comfort or validation and credibility through awards and recognition for our bedding.
I want to come back a little to the Gen Z profile and the demographic that you were targeting. But first, I want to lean in a little to this concept of like safety and trust, which it seems has been more important as a way to identify your consumers and as a way for your consumers to identify themselves. Could you tell us a little bit more about what safety and trust means for this consumer?
Yeah. I think my sense of the market is there's really only a small minority who truly care about the technical sustainability of things, meaning its footprint, whether it was consciously made, resources that went into it, et cetera, et cetera. But I actually think the majority of people who often when they use the word sustainability, they're referring to safety. They're thinking about things like clean beauty or PFAs in your drinking water. When they talk about sustainability, they're actually, I don't know how it's transpired, but it's kind of evolved into a sustainability for me first and for the planet second. Kind of a, is this going to be better for me? Is it safer for my kids? Is it good to bring into my household or not? And so we've definitely leaned into that flip side of the same coin as a way of relating sustainability to our consumer in a more meaningful way.
You know, I think sustainability is such a strange sort of term. It's less strange than ESG. ESG means far too many things and far too little in practice. But sustainability is still quite abstract. And I think that on the European side, it sort of mostly means things like climate change mitigation and water management and a bunch of this environmental stuff. Whereas I think that what I'm finding quite interesting in a lot of other markets, like Southeast Asia, South Asia, for instance, is sustainability as health and something that's good for your family. I think about the cooking oil ads that I watched growing up, and there's always like a mother coming and bringing something like really greasy for the kitchen, for the family table for like dinner, and she's cooked it in this like amazing vegetable oil that is just so good for the family and so safe and healthy, basically, right? And that's the whole messaging. And I think of that now as like a sustainability oriented message because it's talking about something that is not just intrinsic to the product doing what the product should do from a performance perspective, but it's trying to tap into a sense of values. Like what is important to me as a consumer. It's not just that the product does what it should do. It's also that it shouldn't be spinning off microplastics, for instance, right? In the case of bedding, for example. Like, do you think we're seeing this like sustainability just meaning different things to different markets, and maybe in North America actually safety is what's most important?
I think you're absolutely right, Saif. I do think different cultures are going to value sustainability in different ways. I do think over the last 5-7 years, a lot of brand building in the US, whether it's around kitchenware or, as we mentioned earlier, clean beauty, have really zoned in on this idea of safety and trust. I think it's just been a stronger wedge to get into the door of the consumer's home. But I do think in places maybe like Europe or Japan, sustainability in the true sense of the word, right, the original sense of the word, is probably more valued. I think these are generally smaller countries, smaller societies, maybe tighter knit fabric.
Yeah.
Cultures based on just less resources and more of it being shared in their immediate geography and landscape. And I definitely do think of it differently.
It's like that tragedy of the commons problem, right? In these markets, where like in Europe as well, for example, because it's so much more dense, I think than North America, you have this feeling that I have to look out for the community and for society, and therefore my impact on the world and on others becomes much more important. Whereas I think that in North America, it's much more about like my homestead, basically, and what am I bringing into the home, and do I trust it, and is it something that I want here with my family and kids, which I think is actually, strangely enough, quite similar again in the culture I grew up in.
I think the whole suburban concept, roads, cars, the homestead, manifest destiny, the American ideal, lends itself to be more focused on my immediate vicinity, for sure.
Do you think there's like a political aspect to this as well? Like, is it just also it's easier to talk about things like safety and trust? Like, I've noticed that extended producer responsibility schemes seem to have a much better time going through in the US than anything related to emissions, because waste is seen as just a municipality topic, just sort of different to this whole sustainability ESG business? And do you think in that way, actually, like some areas of this are just less political than others?
On the point of political, I actually do think that there has been a swinging rightward in general of politics in the US and as in many places. And I think, especially among men, I think there was an Obama era when we were demanded to be more conscious or sensitive to certain ethical parameters, right, such as sustainability. And I think nowadays there's almost a sense that men are, I think through the political leadership and the climate and environment, invited to be wary of things that might get in the way of progress or get in the way of true value or get in the way of this or that. I do feel like there is a greater sense of not, oh, I need to open myself up to something and learn more about it, and more of a, hey, I need to make sure that potential threats or risks to the core mission or whatever we're doing are shielded, right, or fended off. And I think that takes place in a whole number of different arenas, from gender to feminism to sustainability and related.
Leo, if I move back a couple of steps to your original sort of...
That's a little armchair theory, though.
No, it's good. We're all about armchair theory on this show. If I kind of move back, though, sort of a few steps and think about your original market targeting, the nature of your product lends itself quite well to a sort of a traditional environmental sustainability narrative, because it's an alternative material. It's the water intensity is different, the emissions intensity is different. Like, it just has a different profile to the mainstream. But I guess what you're saying is that you don't really lean on that so much anymore as a differentiator environmentally, even though it's there. It's just not a message that is an important or priority message to land, even though it's there and it's true, which I think is quite interesting. This podcast is brought to you by Altruistiq. Sustainability teams have one thing in common. They all have messy data sitting in silos across the business. This means 60% or more of their time is spent getting data into shape and not making sense of that data or using it to drive action. Altruistiq's AI-based tools can help. Meet Evie, your in-house, always-on-call sustainability assistant. Evie works alongside you and your teams to clean up and transform your enterprise data into usable emissions calculations. Even better, Evie helps you interrogate this data, working like the junior analyst you wish you had. AI alone won't solve all your problems, but data transformation is one you can cross off your list. Visit altruistiq.com to find out more. That's Altruistiq with a Q.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we architected the product in the lab, if you will, to really maximize sustainability impact in a category that is not very mindful or conscious in many ways. From a water use, chemical use, upcycled plastic, etc. But I definitely think, as you saw from that website tour a second ago, it's basically fallen to the bottom. We've really replaced those messages with what I think have been shown to really get more of a response from our customer.
Your main markets are New York and California. Am I right? Like, are those the main places where you guys see traction?
We imagined it would be that way at first. At first, we imagined it would be that way because we thought that those audience are probably have a stronger predilection to care about sustainability.
Yeah.
And I think what we discovered was that if we were to limit ourselves to sustainability and that sensitive audience, we would be a much, much, much smaller business than we are today. Our customer base is essentially one-to-one with geographic population density in the US.
No way. So it's literally just a proper representation of the country, actually.
Yeah, we've mapped it out before, and it looks just like population, right? As far as how it's distributed geographically. And I think that's maybe a reflection of why we're not over-anchored on sustainability. I think there's a lot of folks. America is a big place. It's a beautiful country. There are a lot of parts of the country where fear-mongering, or let me put it this way, where messages about sustainability feel out of touch or almost like fear-mongering, right? Because you can't sense it, you can't see it, you can't maybe even experience all that much climate change if you're just living in the suburbs of Michigan, right?
You know what's interesting, Leo, is I'm tempted to call this a win for sustainability. And the way that I see this as a win for sustainability is you're basically telling our listeners that you designed a product that was more sustainable than the alternatives, right? We should at some point talk about Tencel and why it's better and so on. But like, you designed this product that's more sustainable.
We made a sugar pill. I think that's where you're going with this, right?
Wait. Where I'm going is you made a product that was more sustainable. You thought you would target it to a niche market in California and New York, where you thought there would be Gen Z buyers who cared about this and would pay a premium for a more sustainable product. And then what ended up happening is you basically went mainstream and ended up just selling across the country.
That's why I call it a sugar pill, because basically you've given people the medicine but coated it in candy. Now everyone's taking this medicine unwillingly, unknowingly.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. That's actually a really apt metaphor, right? It's almost like if oat milk becomes really popular because people just decide they like the taste of oat milk more, but it's like a win from a sustainability standpoint.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and I haven't thought about it that way. If we're purely considering from a sustainability standpoint, if that's a win or not, I guess it is. But one thing that made me think about is, let's say we mapped out, say, 100 of the direct-to-consumer and then full-fledged either retail brands that were born and then grew over the last decade, right? I would be willing to venture that 80% of them have some sort of sustainability nod or checkbox or intent somewhere in their messaging and product stack.
Why do you think, though?
Just from pure observation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're right.
And I think it's because it's become table stakes, right? Which is a term that I think is important to acknowledge, where I don't think the consumer cares more than to know that box is checked off, that it's not a zero, it's a one, right? Yeah. And that's it. And that's all I need, right? I don't want to know how. I don't even want to know if it's valid or not, because I think in some consumers' minds, they're worried about going down that rabbit hole and discovering that it's just greenwashing or it's not even legit, right? And there obviously has been a lot of cases of that. And to be honest, to some extent, at the end of the day, as long as you're making something and producing something, you are using the environment to some extent, right? And so I definitely think it's a complicated thing, but I feel like it's turned more into a kind of a table stakes concept.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I have this little theory, which is I think that sustainability-oriented buyers come in two types. There's the mission-driven sort of zealots, and then there are the guilt-free buyers. And the zealots basically want to know everything about the sustainability credentials that they care about with respect to a particular choice of brand, right? There's a small minority of them, and they're probably the ones writing you nasty Google reviews because your product doesn't do X or whatever, right? Actually, I want to come back to also what your consumers tend to talk about more, because I think that's an interesting point. But I think those are the sort of mission-driven buyers. Like, they think carefully. So I'm a mission-driven buyer when it comes to like chocolate. I think carefully about the brand of chocolate I'm going to choose. And then once I've chosen, I'm just going to keep buying that one. And it's going to have a sustainability credential aspect to it. And the guilt-free buyers just want to know that they're not a bad person by buying this thing. And they don't really need to know too much else. And actually, the data says that whatever the label is that you put on the product doesn't really matter. But if there is some sort of sustainability label or credential, it'll do a bit better than the other products. Would you agree?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's I totally agree with that. And I think, let's take something like Whole Foods, for example, right? There's a whole range of products from, let's say, paper towels in one shelf or row to like ground beef, right, in another. And I think when I'm looking at the ground beef, I want to know that it's USDA organic. I want to know that it's like pasture raised and pasture finished. I want to know that no antibiotics were used. It's that like side of the sustainability coin that's all about safety.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas like paper towels, like how good or bad or like how safe or not can it really be? Like what a big point of differentiation is now, is it recycled or not, right? It's not touching me. It's not going in me. It just needs to absorb the water. And I generally think it can do a good job, right? And so I do think it has a lot to do with like, what is the product and what is its use? And what we discovered when we interviewed people was, even in New York, our office was in downtown New York City at the time, right? And there was this really large cafe downstairs, kind of like a Starbucks vibe, but different brand. And we would go in there because you would get tourists, you get all manner of people from any walk of life. And we'd show 10 people, let's say a new PDP design, right? Or a product packaging design. And I would say 7 or 8 of them communicated not just a indifference, but a potential wariness about the sustainability messaging, right? Where it was like, oh, is this going to be less soft? Is this going to feel kind of like crunchy, right? Like, is this going to be, instead of like my wool jacket, like, is this going to be like all polyestery and crunchy, right? They start to attribute experiences of sustainability that they've had in the past, right? Like, you just kind of know that like the really sustainable dishwashing pod is gonna get everywhere and it's not gonna work as well.
It's like vegan chocolate. Do we really want vegan chocolate?
You open up the door of the dishwasher and there's still like little white beads everywhere, right? Or that cleaner. Sure, your house doesn't smell like it's like just been detoxified, and if you lick something, you might die. But it's like at the same time, you're also wondering, is it as clean? I don't know, right? Has it killed as many of the bacteria on these surfaces as something more, quite frankly, toxic or intense and less sustainable has, right? And I think that's a big part of it. You get a lot of Americans who are like, am I getting less for my money or am I getting something defective for my money when it comes to sustainability?
Yeah. It's like, I think most of us hate the idea of single-use plastic packaging. But I think most of us are happy that we buy medication that comes in single-use plastic packaging, because if it came in something like paper packaging or cardboard or something, there's a decent chance it doesn't survive as long as we need it to at the performance level that we need it to. And so I think that's what you're saying, right? You want it to be performant. You want it ideally also to be sustainable, but you really, really want it to be performant.
Correct. I think we want it to be performant. And as a business, I think you want it to be registered. One of the big issues is like, we made a comforter. We still have this comforter to today. Even the threads and the buttons are biodegradable. The fabric is biodegradable. The fill is biodegradable. 10 years after you've bought this thing and used it to its bare thread, you can just bury it in the backyard and know, like consciously, there's no impact on the planet. But a lot of these details are tricky to message, right? For example, like, we went out of our way to develop a specific package that wasn't just recycled. It was like, even the emissions that went into producing that box were lower. It came from a specific factory that was very focused on that. It was done in partnership with the Forest Stewardship Council of the United States. And we would go, and the marketing team would go and interview customers again and try to find out, okay, of all of these different sustainability parameters I just listed, right? Several of them, like, which did you pick up? What did you know? And out of a list of maybe 10 to 15, they would have, one person might have gleaned like 7 or 8 of them, right? The majority of people saw like 2 or 3 things. And now if it's just those 2 or 3 things, you're not really that much different from a brand that doesn't care that much about sustainability, that is just doing a couple things to check off the box. And now you're wondering, okay, are my costs of goods sold, which are deeply inflated by these decisions we've made to be extremely consistent, is it worth it? And the answer is often no.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I mean, at the same time, I kind of look at the success of some, like in your case, sustainability was originally intended to be the brand narrative, ended up not being the brand narrative, but being intrinsic to the product. You do see some product categories out there and some brands now where they have managed to have sustainability be a big driver of the brand value. And so I think about Oatly as one of the classic examples where Oatly is really front and center with their brand positioning around sustainability. Do you think that it's just that certain products lend themselves better to that? Or do you think it's about execution or maybe the markets you target? Like, I think Oatly would probably say that their footprint is not the same as your footprint. It doesn't map neatly to geographic density. It's probably really concentrated like London, New York, LA, San Francisco, like a few big urban hotspots.
I was thinking this as you said it, which I wonder to what extent, circumstances and basically our environmental conditions pushed us in this direction, right? I think Oatly was a brand that was built over a very long time. That's relative, but it had many more years to it than us, right? And I think it was able to find its niches and stack its niches in a very specific way that helped it to grow in a very sustainability-led way. Whereas I think with Buffy, just with our distribution methods, places like Bed Bath & Beyond or Meta advertising, Google advertising, those distribution methods demand of you, I think, something that is more broad audience favoring than just whatever you want to kind of lead with, right? It forces you into the box of, okay, what are the least common denominators and how would the average person prioritize these purchase criteria, right? And if Oatly were operated in the same way that we were, I think they probably would have been forced more to focus on flavor more than anything, because that is the most important factor, right, in a product.
That's the performance.
But I think it has a lot to do, with your distribution, your kind of business journey, as much as it does with overall market sentiment.
I wonder if there's also just something about, as the founder, the business in significant part is like a manifestation of what you want it to be. And I wonder whether it was more important to you that Buffy be a mainstream major player in its category than it was, on balance, that Buffy be a niche sustainability-oriented brand, which might have ended up being like a fifth the size, maybe much more concentrated in a few locations, but much more wearing its sustainability credentials on its sleeve. I think the sugar pill strategy works well from a sustainability angle, so I'm pretty happy with how things worked out as an environmentalist. But, I kind of wonder if there's an element of that as well.
Oh, I absolutely think so. I think it is very hard to resist when you have a marketing funnel or several funnels that are working very well that have nothing to do with sustainability. I think the average business person is looking at their team, at their fixed costs, at their investor expectations and thinking, what is that trade-off, right? Do we build more patiently? Do we take more financial risk? Or do we show results, right? And we make sure that this thing that we're trying to give birth to, that is still very nascent, that is still very fragile and brittle in many ways, is as protected, as safe, and in as healthy of a footing as possible, right? And I think in those early days, I think different founders have different senses of vision or planning, but I think that call of financial stability and security was really important to me.
And I guess if I go back again to when you started, do you think that when you started, you just assumed that a more sustainable product is a good market niche to build a large business? Or was it that actually you personally were motivated to create a more sustainable business? Or was it just actually this is a better product?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of both. I think at the time, maybe naively, considering the contents of our conversation, we felt like this was a moment where if IKEA, as we know it, were extremely sustainable in everything they did, the amount of popularity and the willingness for the consumer to meet them there would be really exciting. And that was kind of our initial vision, right? Let's start with bedding. Let's start with something really comfortable, emotionally powerful and in turn expand through the house. So I definitely think that there was business tactics to it and the opportunism that is involved in business strategy. But I also definitely think that the sustainability sense, the intrinsic sense or endogenous sense of wanting sustainability was very much informed by my own experience firsthand, going through every dyeing, spinning, weaving, cut and sew mill across India, China, Pakistan, Southeast Asia, and seeing just the waste, the chemistry, and the runoff that is involved in this industry, right? And also being very familiar with the fast fashion equivalent of like usage and wastage from the consumer, right? I think it's very hard for someone in the industry to not be aware of and somewhat sensitive to that. Yeah.
Do you think there's a world actually where Buffy might do really well in Europe with a very sustainability-led narrative? I mean, it kind of seems, because you have a bunch of businesses now coming up in Europe. There's certainly some in the UK, but I think there are actually even more in the Nordics and in continental Europe, where sustainability is a really core part of the brand value proposition. And maybe that niche that you were looking for that didn't really materialize in the way that you'd expected is a bigger niche in some of these markets. Do you feel like that might actually be an opportunity?
Yeah, I like the idea of that. I think that with expansion into a new geographical and really cultural market, right, you get the opportunity to maybe position yourself somewhat differently and to test that. I think, launching in China or let's say in Italy, where there isn't already an English-speaking culture, affords you that opportunity more than like launching in the UK or Australia, right? Same with Japan, I think. However, I think just purely from a business strategy standpoint, I think the importance of brand consistency is just so critical that there's, half of the fibers of my body are like screaming, no way, like, don't do that, right? Definitely don't do that. But you could still try and to build some marketing funnels in a more tactical way. Like you wouldn't just strategically settle it as like, hey, we're a sustainability brand in Europe, right? But I definitely think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, to be honest though, I think that actually anchoring on safety, the more that I think about that, just given the context of your product, right? A comforter is something that you want to wrap yourself up in and feel comfortable and safe. And so actually leaning on that seems to be a winning strategy. I always want to end on something that is a little more like advice for our listeners. And my takeaway here would be that actually sustainability just means different things in different markets. And where you want to land is you want to find that sweet spot from a messaging perspective where it really resonates with what your consumers are looking for and your customers are looking for from performance. Actually, like you want to find the performance indicators that can overlap with a sense of values as well and positive values and use that as a part of the brand positioning. Would you edit or adjust that or Control-Alt-Delete it?
I think the very simple version of that is like some products are simple enough for sustainability to be a massive differentiator.
Yeah.
And some products are not. Some products have overwhelming or overriding purchase criteria. And you have to do exactly as you say. You have to calibrate accordingly.
Leo, thank you so much for joining us. It was fantastic to have you on the show. We should do this again soon.
Yeah, I would love to. Yep. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this edition of the State of Sustainability podcast. Tap follow or subscribe so you get notified when the next episode comes out in early 2026. And if you enjoyed the episode, we would really appreciate if you left us a review or just like a 5-star rating or something of that sort.